Have you ever wondered what it truly feels like to be born into a world that already decided who you are, not based on your soul, your heart, your mind, but only on the color of your skin? What if every door was closed before you even learned how to knock? What if survival wasn't just about food or shelter, but about clinging to the fragile thread of hope every single day, because the world insisted you were less than human? Welcome to Equal Voices Hub. Today, we take you through the darkest chapters of our shared history, eras stained with the cruelty of racism. But more importantly, we share the stories of survival, of courage, of people who stared hate in the face and whispered, "Still, I rise." Before we dive deep, I want you to tell us in the comments, which of our upcoming stories do you want to hear more about? Is it the strength of Indian revolutionaries under British colonialism, the resilience of black communities in 1960s America, or the resistance of indigenous people stripped of their land and dignity? Let us know below. Your voice matters. And now, let's begin with the very first footsteps of survival, the 1700s North America. Before colonizers arrived in waves, there existed hundreds of thriving indigenous nations with languages, laws, traditions, families, harmony with the earth. They had stories etched in oral memory of rivers that carried names, of lands that weren't owned but honored. But all of that began to change when ships sailed from the east with flags and weapons, and an idea, a deadly idea, that one people white Europeans were superior, that indigenous people were savage, uncivilized, disposable. This belief justified everything: stolen land, burned villages, mass killings. Colonizers passed laws that erased identities and erased names. Indigenous children were taken, ripped from their mothers' arms and forced into boarding schools. Haircut, language banned, their culture beaten out of them. Imagine being a child 8 years old and being told that your name, the one your grandmother whispered into your ear, is illegal, that your gods don't exist, that your ancestors are myths. Generations of trauma were planted like poison in the soil, but they survived. They held on to stories secretly. They spoke their languages in whispers behind closed doors. They prayed to their ancestors under the moonlight. Grandmothers taught songs in silence, fingers tracing symbols in the dirt. Despite the government's efforts to erase them, they endured because hope refused to die. In the 1700s and 1800s, another hell unfolded across oceans. The British Empire spread its shadow over India, claiming they came to civilize the East. In truth, they came to exploit, dominate, and humiliate. Racism wasn't just a side effect, it was the engine of colonial rule. Indians were made to feel inferior every single day. Their brown skin, their religions, their languages mocked, banned, devalued. British officers passed laws that ensured Indian workers earned only a fraction of white wages. Indians could not share train compartments with white men. They could not enter certain clubs, streets, schools. Their own land became foreign to them. They were told their gods were false, their history uncivilized, their future dependent on British mercy. British textbooks in Indian schools painted Indians as lazy, passive, emotional, everything the colonizers needed to justify domination. But hope is a stubborn thing. From tiny villages rose voices. A lawyer named Mohandas Gandhi refused to be silent. He was thrown off a train in South Africa for sitting in a whites-only compartment. But instead of breaking, he ignited. He returned to India and planted seeds of resistance, not with weapons, but with soul. Marches, fasts, boycotts, people weaving their own cloth to resist the colonial economy, refusing to buy British salt. Spinning wheels turned into weapons of peace. Gandhi taught millions, you are not inferior, you are sacred, you matter. The hope wasn't just political, it was spiritual. Women sang protest songs while cooking meals. Teachers secretly taught banned texts. Even prisoners in British jails etched poems on their cell walls. They believed in a future they would never see, and because of that belief it eventually came. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, in the very foundation of America, a nightmare was being built. The transatlantic slave trade had already torn millions of Africans from their homes, shackled them in ships where dead bodies were thrown overboard like cargo. In America, they were sold, children separated from mothers, men branded with hot iron, women raped, families destroyed. And why? Because racism said they were property, because white supremacy needed free labor. The economy of the South grew, rich from cotton, tobacco, and sugar, and that wealth was fertilized by black pain. But this isn't just a story of suffering, it's a story of surviving the impossible. Africans brought to America brought their spirits to. They sang songs in code spirituals that told each other how to escape, how to survive. They held secret church services in forests. They told stories of their ancestors, even if they had to disguise them in Christian metaphors. Harriet Tubman, a small woman with epilepsy, guided over 300 enslaved people to freedom. Frederick Douglass taught himself to read when it was forbidden. He didn't just survive, he became one of the greatest orators America ever produced. Sojourner Truth stood before crowds of white men and thundered, "Ain't I a woman?" Hope, again, was the fire that burned in chains. Even after slavery ended, racism mutated. Jim Crow laws emerged. Separate but equal, lynchings became public entertainment. Black people could be murdered for looking at someone the wrong way. But in the face of this terror, they kept living. They built schools, churches, newspapers. They played jazz and sang blues. They marched. They resisted. They loved on Europe during the 1930s and 1940s. Racism took on a form so dark it nearly consumed the world. The Nazi regime didn't just promote anti-Semitism, it turned it into state policy. Jews were labeled, isolated, hunted, exterminated. Children with curly hair were dragged from their homes, entire families deported to ghettos and then to concentration camps. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Dachau, names we must never forget. Over 6 million Jewish people were murdered not because of crimes, not because of war, but because of who they were. And still, hope flickered in ghettos. Children drew pictures of flowers and stars. In camps, prisoners wrote poetry on scraps of paper. They held Shabbat dinners in secret. They said Kaddish for the dead even when they were starving. Anne Frank, in a tiny attic, wrote, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. That belief is a rebellion. To hope in hell is the most human thing we've ever done." Let's now move to the southern tip of Africa. The year is 1948. Apartheid becomes law in South Africa. Every part of life was segregated by skin, by blood, by force. Black South Africans were told where to live, where to walk, what to own. They needed passes to enter white areas. They were banned from voting, from schooling, from dignity. Whites made up a tiny portion of the population but controlled nearly everything. The system was designed to break the spirit, to kill the dream of equality before it was born, but they underestimated hope. Nelson Mandela, a lawyer and activist, was imprisoned for 27 years. But when he came out of prison, he smiled. He forgave. He embraced his enemies. He gave the world a lesson in moral leadership. Townships like Soweto became centers of culture and resistance. Children threw stones at tanks. Women organized boycotts. Musicians sang songs of unity. Artists painted murals of hope. And in 1994, the unthinkable happened. Mandela was elected president. The chains were broken. Not just by law, but by love. And finally, we return to America. The 1960s, the Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King Jr., standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, says, "I have a dream." Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat. Malcolm X demands justice by any means necessary. Young black students face mobs just to attend school. Police dogs, fire hoses, tear gas. But the movement cannot be stopped because it isn't just a protest, it's a prayer, a collective belief that things can be better. And they did get better, but not perfect. Today, racism still exists, in systems and silence, in shadows, but so does hope. It lives in every child who reads a banned book, in every elder who passes down a language once forbidden, in every march, every vote, every conversation, in every comment section where people listen to each other and learn. You, watching this right now, you are part of that legacy. You are part of that hope. Thank you for being here with us at Equal Voices Hub. These stories are not just history, they are warnings and they are lights. They tell us where we've been, so we can know where to go. Now tell us, which story do you want us to tell next? Whose voice do you want to hear louder? Drop it in the comments and make sure you're subscribed. Because together, we keep the hope alive.